Welcome everybody. My name is Charlie Fear and I'm the director of Camp Chewonki for Boys. And we're here today with Megan Phillips, our farm and woodlot manager at Chewonki. And she's going to tell me a little bit more about some of the things that you can find here around the Chewonki Neck that provide evidence for the human history of this place.
It's true. So we're standing right now out in one of our pastures on Saltmarsh Farm. This particular pasture we call North Pasture. And this land, Chewonki Neck, is a peninsula. It's shaped like your left hand, curled up like this. And it is the ancestral land of the Wabanaki people. For thousands of years, the Wabanaki people utilized Chewonki Neck for fishing and hunting and agricultural land. We're standing in this moment in a beautiful stone-lined old foundation. This was likely one of the first homes that was built on Chewonki Neck by white European settlers who colonized this land back in the 1700s. So I brought a few objects with me today to help me tell the story of the history of Chewonki Neck. Can we check them out, Charlie?
Cool, let's take a look.
Okay. I've got three things here. An oyster shell, a brick, and then a skein of dark wool.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So let's just take a moment and imagine how these three objects might represent pieces of the history of this land. Charlie, do you have any ideas of what this oyster could represent in terms of the history of the land use here on Chewonki Neck?
That's a great question. You know, I'm a big fan of oysters, and oysters actually still play a big role in Maine fisheries to this day. I wonder if it had anything to do with the food of people who inhabited this land.
So at certain parts of the year, the Wabanaki people would spend more time inland, and in certain parts of the year, they would spend more time on the coast. And on the coast, they would be doing things like harvesting shellfish and drying them out and using them for food. One of the pieces of evidence that still exists today on Chewonki Neck that's related to the Wabanaki use of this land is out at the point. And I said that Chewonki Neck is sort of like your left hand curled up like this. Out at the point, there are some juniper bushes. And if you dig into the area under the roots of those juniper bushes, you can find the debris, the like crushed up shells that are essentially a giant compost pile.
Whoa.
From when the Wabanaki people were harvesting shellfish from this land.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah. Yep. So then we have the brick. Any ideas?
Interesting. You know, as I travel around New England, I see a lot of buildings made out of brick. And I know that we've used clay here year-round for a lot of really cool projects. I wonder if there's any connection between that.
Yeah, this brick actually represents a period of time in the 17 and 1800s when there were 3 brick-making sites on Chewonki Neck. It would take 2 men and a horse a full year to harvest clay, bake the bricks, cut down the trees in order to fire the kilns, and make enough bricks in 1 year to build 1 house.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And there were 3 brick-making sites on campus. You can still, on the peninsula, see large areas where clay was excavated. One of those is down close to a small building that we call the Pump House, if you've been on Chewonki Neck and explored the woods there.
I know it well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
So there's the brick. Okay.
Great.
So what about the wool?
Oh, this stuff is soft. You know, we still have a lot of sheep around here today, and much like this stone foundation, I feel like I see a lot of stone walls all around Chewonki Neck. Is there a chance that there were maybe sheep existing here on farms before Camp Chewonki was established?
Now, I mentioned that the brick makers needed to cut down trees in order to fire the brick kilns and turn that, wet clay into a finished brick. In fact, the brick makers took down almost every single tree on this entire peninsula, which is a pretty incredible fact. And that land was maintained as open in the 1800s and early 1900s as sheep pasture. So when you're walking around Chewonki Neck, as you said, you'll see out in the fields some stone walls like the one that we're close to today, but you'll also see those in the middle of the forest. And New Englanders moved more stones to build stone walls than the Egyptians moved to build the pyramids. In fact, if you were to take all of the stone walls in New England and line them up they could go all the way around the globe at the equator.
That's incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
My mind's a little bit blown.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, okay. So those stone walls were built as early fence lines. If you want to pasture animals or grow a garden, you can't have rocks just everywhere. And also you need to contain your animals. So those old stone walls are actually the fence lines that were used to hold in some of the animals that were being raised. And you're right that New England had a major merino sheep boom. Merino sheep have a really soft wool. Like if you want a really nice wool sweater, go for merino wool. And merino sheep were grown on this land for a period of time between the mid 1800s into the early 1900s.
So we had the Wabanaki people harvesting oysters. We had early settlers making bricks for housing. We've had farmers over the year having sheep here, and so the land's probably changed to accommodate those different needs. Could you tell me a little bit more about what we would have seen change over that time?
This land has certainly changed significantly over time. For thousands of years, the Wabanaki people were mostly living in a forested environment. However, they did clear some areas for agricultural purposes, or clear the undergrowth from underneath the dense forest for agricultural reasons. But for the most part, this area was heavily virgin forests for thousands of years. Now, the brick makers, as I said, cleared most of that land for making bricks. And then settlers maintained this land as open to raise sheep. Over the past 100 years, Chewonki Neck has been allowed to regrow in certain places. So as you walk through Chewonki Neck, you are very rarely in open land except on the farm and in the main parts of campus. Mostly Chewonki Neck is this beautiful forest, and you'll occasionally stumble across a stone wall in the middle of the forest. That's an indication that it used to be a sheep pasture.
Talked about oyster shells. We've seen a brick. We've seen some wool. Are there other elements on this campus besides stone walls that would give us some evidence of humans being here?
Yes, absolutely. There's so much cool human history on Chewonki Neck. For example, there's these beautiful hand-dug stone-lined wells that you'll find in different places around campus, but you might not even know that they're there. For example, there's one under the gazebo that's right next to the farmhouse. Yes.
Oh, I think I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's others here in pasture. Those are the wells that were close to the early human habitations here when the white settlers colonized this land. There's an old cemetery that has a gravestone from 1799 here on the farm.
Whoa.
Yes. And then last summer, we're in the process of transitioning what we're calling our east side pasture from land that used to be pasture and then was allowed to regrow back into forest, and now we're creating another pasture there. And our cows and sheep are actually over there today grazing. But last year when we were doing some work over on the east side pasture, it was freshly cleared, and we realized that there was an old farm trash dump in the middle of the pasture. And we actually did an archaeological dig with some of the boys at boys camp, and one of the boys found an entire horse harness from likely the 1800s. None of the leather parts, but just all of the metal parts.
Wow.
We also found a whole bunch of different tools and jars and ceramics and glass, some amazing evidence of early human habitation on this land.
And so what did you do with all those things that you found?
We built some beautiful little display cases, and they're displayed over in our new coop classroom on the farm, along with some of the photos of this farm 100 years ago. I mentioned that we are standing in the site of an old foundation. There used to be a house around where we are right now. We are actually not so far from a house that was built back in the 1800s and is still standing today. Can I show it to you?
Yeah, let's check it out.
Great.
So Megan, what are we seeing here?
So right now we're looking at the back of the farm barn and the home that's attached to it, which we call the gatehouse. This type of traditional New England architecture on farm is sometimes referred to as big house, little house, back house, barn.
Interesting. So what exactly does that mean?
Well, when folks would arrive to a piece of land and build a settlement there, they would need something to live in, and they would need something for their animals to live in. So usually the first thing that would be built is a little house and a barn. But over time, as means and time allowed, folks would add an addition onto the house. That's called the big house. and they would add something that connected the house to the barn. That's referred to as the back house. And that thing that connects the house and the barn might be a carriage house, or might be, in our case, a workshop where we sort of keep the tools and equipment that we're going to need to run the farm. So this particular big house, little house, back house barn was built in the 1860s and is still used today.
Wow. So now that we've learned all of this stuff about the ways that humans have inhabited this land, what are we going to do with that knowledge?
All right, here's the challenge. I'm going to challenge you and I right now and folks at home to build a miniature farm.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty cool, right? So no matter who you are, as a human being, you need food and shelter and water in order to survive. So in building a miniature farm, you're going to want to think, where am I going to live? If I have animals, which animals do I want and where are they going to live? How am I going to feed myself and feed my animals? How am I going to take care of my land? Where am I going to get water from? Those are some of the things you might think about as you're building a miniature version of a farm at home.
So I'm thinking about what we're going to need for that. We're going to need some materials to make this happen. Do you have any recommendations or guidelines to follow when you're collecting maybe some natural materials to make that happen?
Yeah, certainly. If you're going to use natural materials in order to build your miniature farm, you should be thoughtful about what you collect and where you collect from. Oftentimes when I'm building fairy houses, or in this case, a miniature farm, I like to ensure that I'm only utilizing things that have already fallen to the ground or are already dead. Things like rocks and sticks, or leaves that have already fallen to the ground. If I am going to gather any living material, I want to be sure that I'm taking it in a balance, right? If I'm going to capture a few buttercups, for example, we've got lots of buttercup flowers around us, to represent something in my miniature farm, I want to only take a few buttercups and leave plenty behind to continue going to seed and growing future buttercups.
That's great.
Yeah.
Really good ideas. So does it need to be natural materials? Are there other things that I could use in addition to the things I might find in the natural world?
That's a great question, Charlie. You don't have to use natural materials. You could build a miniature farm using Legos, or using building blocks, or modeling clay, or you could cut pictures out of a magazine and make a two-dimensional farm on a piece of paper. There's all sorts of ways that you could build your mini farm.
Sounds like I have a lot of options and I just need to use my imagination for what will work.
The imagination is the key part. Are you ready to get started?
I am so ready.
All right, let's go.
Here we go. Smokes, tell me about what we've got here.
This was so much fun to build. Okay, so my mini farm, the first thing that I built was the road, because I was thinking, oh, you'd need a way to get into this piece of land that you were sort of landing on. And then I was thinking about that idea of big house, little house, back house, barn. So this is my little house, and this is my barn. The barn is really big because I want a lot of animals. Okay, and then this like represents the roof in between the little house and the barn, so that would be the back house.
Cool.
I haven't had time yet to build my big house yet, so we're only 3/4 of the way there.
That will come in time.
Exactly, once we have the capacity. You know, all farms need a water source. So in the back here, I have this little stone-lined well.
Brilliant.
Yes, and then I've noticed that many farms in Maine come along with a woodlot, because you need to be able to burn firewood in order to heat your house. So these are the woods, the backwoods. And then my garden here includes a few different things. Over here are a couple one-of-a-kind plants. Those are my perennials, the things that come back like year after year after year, like rhubarb. You know, you don't have to replant it every year. And then I have my row crops. Those are my annual crops, like carrots and tomatoes and peppers and like the things that you grow for food. And then these little pieces that are a little bit taller represent things like oats and wheat, things that I would grow both for food for myself, but also food for my animals.
That makes sense.
And then on the other side of the road is the pasture. So the animals can go straight out from the barn into the pasture. And I built a little stone wall along the edge to keep them in.
That's brilliant.
Yes, I could have gone on for so much longer. I had such a great time.
I can feel it. I feel both inspired by this and a little bit intimidated. I hope you like what I put together.
I can't wait to see it.
Should we
Can
take
we
a
go look at it?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Charlie, what are you doing?
You know, I was so inspired by your pasture, and I put a garden in there for my crops, but I hadn't found a place for my animals. But I've captured a couple pieces of livestock here.
Oh.
It looks like I have some young pill bugs here that are going to help help me manage my pasture and maybe feed me in the winter months.
Mini livestock.
They're a little bit unwieldy, and I'm a novice farmhand, so they might just stay. My arm might just be the pasture for now.
That's a good idea.
But we can look at the rest of what I've got here. So
I'm so excited.
I've got my farmhouse here. I haven't actually added my barn because, as you can see, I'm still working on my livestock. I should have built the barn first. But I've got a little roof. I got the big chimney there that's going to make sure that it's providing heat and maybe also a place to cook. I've got a nice little path. I figured that the fairy farmers would like something soft to tread upon, so they've got some white pine needles there, something that we can find in abundance here on Chewonki Neck. And then I got my little farm with some row crops as well. And as you can see, I believe that the things that I eat should not only be nutritious but also beautiful.
Yes.
So they're very colorful. And then over here I've got my water source. It's a big industrial stone well with a little holding tank up here, so that I don't run out of water when the weather's a little bit drier. So there we go.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks to Megan for talking us through the history of this land and the ways that the Wabanaki people use the water around here for harvesting things like oysters for their food, the way that brick makers in the early United States were creating houses out of the natural resources here, and the way that the farming on this land has evolved into the modern era, even as we maintain some of the techniques of human-powered and horse-powered farming here on this land. I hope you'll take some time to think about all the ways that you can incorporate that knowledge into building your own farm, whether it's thinking about the different types of buildings, big house, little house, back house, barn, or the types of crops or livestock that you're going to incorporate, and where's your water going to come from? Are you basing yourself by a natural body of water on the coast, a pond, a lake, or are you making a well to supply it? However your farm shows up, make sure that you're sharing it with us. Take a picture, maybe write about your experience of creating that farm. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to what you're coming up with.
See you next time.
Bye everybody.